The high beams of my truck cut through the thick darkness, illuminating only 20 feet of road ahead before surrendering to the impenetrable African night. I switched to my CB radio for the 5th time in an hour, desperate for any human voice, but heard only static, punctuated by strange clicking sounds I'd never encountered in my 15 years of driving. Then I saw it, a figure standing motionless in the middle of the road, visible for just a split second before it vanished, leaving no trace, not like it ran away, like it had never been there at all. But I know what I saw. A person, unnaturally tall and thin, with eyes that reflected my headlights like a nocturnal animal's. My name is Marcus Adebayo, half Nigerian, half British, and I've been driving cargo trucks across the African continent for nearly 2 decades. I know every major transport route from Cairo to Cape Town, and dozens of back roads that don't appear on any commercial map. I've navigated desert sandstorms, negotiated with corrupt border officials, and even outrun armed bandits in the lawless regions of certain countries I won't name. But nothing in my extensive experience prepared me for what happened 3 weeks ago on a remote stretch of highway connecting Zambia to Tanzania, a route I'd traveled at least 20 times before without incident. My home is a modest apartment in Nairobi, though I spend only about 6 days a month there. It's sparsely furnished. Just a bed, a small kitchen, a worn leather sofa facing a television I rarely watch, and walls covered with maps marked with colored pins tracking every route I've driven. The bathroom has a perpetually leaky faucet I've never found time to fix. My real home is my truck, a 2015 Scania R Series that I've modified extensively for the brutal African roads. I've named her Amina, after my late mother. The cabin is equipped with reinforced locks, a mini refrigerator, a custom sleeping berth, and a satellite phone for emergencies. At least, that's what I had before that night. Before the road that shouldn't have existed. The job seemed routine. Transport mining equipment from Lusaka, Zambia, to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Good money, straightforward route, reputable client. I'd done similar runs dozens of times. The cargo was loaded without issue, paperwork properly processed, and I was on schedule as I pulled out of Lusaka in the early afternoon. My plan was to drive through the night, as I often did. The border crossing went smoothly, and I was making good time as the sun began to set. The first unusual occurrence was subtle. My GPS flickered briefly as I passed a small village about 2 hours into Tanzania. The screen went black for perhaps 3 seconds, then returned to normal. I thought nothing of it at first. Electronic glitches are common in remote areas. About an hour later, I noticed the road didn't match my memory. It should have been relatively straight for this stretch, but now it curved more frequently, with strange angular turns that seemed inefficient for a highway. I checked my route and confirmed I was still on the main road, connecting the two countries. The pavement beneath my wheels was well maintained. Too well maintained, actually. African highways, even major ones, typically show wear, potholes, and hasty repairs. This surface was unusually smooth, almost pristine. The center line markings were crisp and seemed to reflect my headlights with unusual brightness. I didn't know it then, but I should have turned around at the first sign that the road had changed. As twilight deepened into night, I began to notice other discrepancies. The roadside vegetation wasn't right for this region. I know African flora reasonably well, and these trees were more densely packed than they should have been, with strange, contorted shapes barely visible in my headlights. The usual sounds of the African night, insects, birds, distant animal calls, were absent, replaced by an unnerving silence, broken only by the rumble of my engine and the hum of tires on asphalt. I checked my watch, 8:45 p.m. I should have been approaching a small trading town where I typically stopped for coffee. Instead, there was no sign of human habitation in any direction. I tried my satellite phone, thinking to call my dispatcher for clarification on my location, but found no signal. Unusual, since these systems typically work anywhere with a clear view of the sky. My regular mobile phone similarly showed no service. The GPS was still functioning, insisting I was on the correct highway, yet nothing looked familiar. I briefly considered stopping to check my paper maps, but something instinctive urged me to keep moving. In Africa, you learn to trust those instincts. I decided I would continue until I reached some landmark I recognized or found a safe place to stop. At approximately 9:30 p.m., I crested a hill and saw headlights in the distance. Another vehicle approaching from the opposite direction. Relief washed over me. Whatever strangeness was occurring, at least I wasn't completely alone on this road. I flashed my lights in greeting as we drew closer, a common courtesy among truck drivers. The oncoming vehicle, another cargo truck, from what I could see, didn't respond. As we passed each other, I glanced at the other driver's cabin and felt my blood turn cold. There was no one behind the wheel. The truck rolled past, its engine rumbling normally, but the driver's seat was unmistakably empty. I nearly swerved off the road in shock, braking hard and watching in my side mirror as the headlights continued down the road before disappearing around a bend. I sat there for several minutes, engine idling, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Perhaps the driver had been leaning down to retrieve something. Perhaps the angle and darkness had created an illusion. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. When I finally put Amina back in gear and continued driving, the quality of the darkness seemed to have changed. It felt heavier, somehow pressing against my windows, like something tangible. The beam of my headlights seemed to penetrate less distance, as if the darkness were more resistant to illumination. It was shortly after this encounter that I first noticed the figure standing in the road, the one I mentioned earlier. After it vanished, I slowed considerably, scanning the roadside with both my headlights and the powerful spotlights I'd mounted on Amina's roof. There was no sign of anyone, no movement in the underbrush, no footprints on the dusty shoulder. When I briefly stepped out to check, the air felt unusually cold and carried an unfamiliar scent, something ancient and earthy, like old graves and clay. I continued driving, now keeping my speed below 40 kilometers per hour. The rational part of my mind suggested I had merely seen an animal, perhaps a thin antelope of some kind. But I knew better. What I had seen had stood on two legs, with proportions both human and somehow wrong. And those eyes, no animal native to Africa has eyes that large, or that reflect light with such unnatural intensity. Around 11 p.m., my headlights illuminated a sign for a village, Mbosi, a name unfamiliar to me despite my extensive knowledge of the region. Under normal circumstances, I would have avoided unknown villages at night, but I desperately needed to orient myself and perhaps find someone who could explain the strange alterations to the highway. The turnoff was a dirt road, well graded but narrow. I hesitated only briefly before turning Amina onto it, following the rough track for about 2 kilometers until the outlines of buildings appeared ahead. The village seemed deserted at first glance. About 20 structures arranged in a rough circle around what appeared to be a central gathering place. The buildings were a mix of traditional mud brick homes with thatched roofs and more modern constructions with corrugated metal roofing. My headlights cast long shadows as I slowly rolled into the village center. There were no electric lights visible, no cooking fires, no sign of habitation except for the buildings themselves, which appeared maintained rather than abandoned. Stopped the truck and cut the engine, but left the headlights on, illuminating the dusty, open area before me. The silence was absolute, in a way I've never experienced in Africa. No dogs barking, no chickens rustling, no murmur of voices from inside. Homes. I took my heavy flashlight, which doubles as a weapon in dangerous situations, and stepped down from the cabin, closing and locking the door behind me out of habit. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding strangely muffled in the dense night air. "Is anyone here? I need directions." No response came. I walked slowly toward the nearest building, playing my flashlight beam across its surface. The walls were decorated with intricate patterns, not unusual for many African cultures, but these designs were unfamiliar to me. Geometric shapes interlocking in ways that seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles. I approached the door, which stood slightly ajar, and called out again before pushing it open wider. The interior was simply furnished. A wooden table, 2 chairs, cooking implements hanging from the walls, a sleeping mat rolled in one corner, a half-prepared meal sat on the table, vegetables partially cut, a pot of what appeared to be beans, now cold. It looked as if the occupants had simply walked away in the middle of making dinner. I backed out of the dwelling, increasingly uneasy. I checked 2 more homes and found similar scenes, evidence of daily life interrupted mid-action. A chair knocked over, a cup of tea, long cold, children's toys scattered across a floor, but no people, and strangest of all, no footprints leading away from the dwellings. It was as if the entire village population had simply vanished simultaneously. In the center of the village stood a large baobab tree, not unusual in itself, as these ancient trees often serve as community gathering places across Africa. But this particular tree seemed different. Its massive trunk was carved with symbols, similar to those on the house walls, but more elaborate and extensive. At the base of the tree was a circle of stones, clearly deliberately placed, and hanging from the lower branches were dozens of small bundles wrapped in red cloth. I approached cautiously, playing my flashlight over the strange bundles. They swayed slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. I reached out tentatively toward one, then stopped as a voice spoke behind me. "I wouldn't touch those if I were you." I spun around, nearly dropping my flashlight. An elderly man stood about 10 paces away, leaning on a wooden walking stick. He wore traditional clothing with beaded decorations I couldn't identify with any particular tribe I knew. His face was deeply lined, his eyes milky with cataracts, yet he seemed to have no trouble seeing me. "Who are you?" I asked, my heart racing. "Where is everyone?" "Gone," he said simply. "They knew to leave when the road changed." His English was perfect, without the accent I would have expected in this region. "The road? What do you mean the Apros road changed?" The old man tilted his head, studying me as if puzzled by my questions. "You are on it, yet you don't know? The wandering road appears only at certain times, under certain conditions. It borrows the form of existing roads for a time. Those who know the signs recognize when it has taken over and know to stay away until it moves on." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "That's impossible. Roads don't just change." The old man shrugged. "And yet, here you are, in a village that doesn't exist on any map you know, having seen things that shouldn't be possible. The people here left because they recognize the signs. I remain because someone must warn travelers like yourself." "Warn about what, exactly?" I asked, although part of me didn't want to hear the answer. "The road has appetites," he said, his voice dropping lower. "It needs travelers. Their fears, their confusion, their..." He paused, searching for the word. "Essence. The longer you drive on it, the more it takes from you. Haven't you felt it? The heaviness in your mind? The way your memories seem slightly less clear? The growing certainty that you've been driving much longer than your watch suggests?" I had felt all those things, but had attributed them to fatigue and stress. "How do I get back to the real road? The actual highway?" The old man's expression softened slightly. "You're asking the wrong question. The road is real. Perhaps more real than the highways you're familiar with. It has existed longer, but if you wish to return to your conventional route, you must give the road what it wants." "Which is what?" I asked, dreading the answer. "A memory," he said. "Something precious, something that defines you. Offer it freely at the next marker. You see, stone pillar on the right side of the road, about 5 kilometers from here. Stop there, turn off your engine, and speak the memory aloud. If the road accepts your offering, you'll find yourself back on your familiar highway when you start driving again. And if it doesn't accept," the old man's face remained impassive, "then you will continue to drive. The truck that passed you earlier, did you notice it had no driver? Yet it continues on its way. Eventually, the vehicles travel on without their operators. An efficient system, wouldn't you say?" I opened my mouth to ask another question, but a sudden gust of wind swept through the village, bringing with it a cloud of dust that momentarily obscured my vision. When it cleared, the old man was gone. I called out, searching between the buildings with my flashlight, but found no trace of him. The bundles hanging from the baobab tree swayed more violently now, though the air around me was perfectly still. Returned to my truck quickly, locking the doors once inside. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I wasn't sure if I had experienced something supernatural or if fatigue was causing me to hallucinate. Either possibility was troubling. I decided to continue driving, hoping to find my way back to a familiar landmark or settlement with actual people who could help me orient myself. As I pulled away from the village, I checked my rearview mirrors. In the red glow of my taillights, I could have sworn I saw dozens of figures standing between the buildings, watching my departure. When I braked and turned to look directly out the back window, there was nothing there but empty dirt paths and silent dwellings. The road beyond the village seemed to narrow, the pavement deteriorating into packed dirt and gravel. The surrounding vegetation grew denser, branches occasionally scraping against the sides of my truck. My headlights illuminated no more than 10 meters ahead now, the darkness beyond seemingly absolute. I drove slowly, constantly checking my mirrors, though I wasn't sure what I was watching for. True to the old man's word, about 5 kilometers from the village, my headlights illuminated a stone pillar on the right side of the road. It stood about 2 meters tall, covered in symbols similar to those in the village. I slowed as I approached it, then stopped alongside. Through my open window, I could see that the pillar was ancient, weathered by countless seasons, yet the symbols remained clearly visible, seeming to absorb the light from my truck rather than reflect it. I sat there for several minutes, engine idling, contemplating the old man's instructions. The rational part of my mind insisted this was madness. Roads don't wander. Memories can't be offered as payment. I was clearly suffering from exhaustion, perhaps even carbon monoxide poisoning from a leak in my engine. The logical course of action was to continue driving until I reached a major settlement or was able to get a signal on my satellite phone. Yet another part of me, the part that has survived decades of traveling Africa's most remote and dangerous regions, urged me to take the old man's advice. Whatever was happening, hallucination, supernatural event, elaborate deception, playing along might be my best chance of finding my way back to familiar territory. I turned off the engine. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the occasional tick of cooling metal from my truck. The darkness pressed against the windows, seemingly darker than any night I had experienced before. I took a deep breath and began to speak aloud. "My name is Marcus Adebayo," I began, feeling foolish, yet compelled to continue. "I offer this memory as payment for safe passage back to my proper road." I paused, considering what memory to offer. What was precious enough to satisfy this alleged sentient road, yet not so vital that its loss would destroy who I am? Finally, I decided. When I was 12 years old, my mother took me to the ocean for the first time, I said, my voice gaining confidence. We lived inland, and I had never seen such an expanse of water. The waves terrified and thrilled me. My mother held my hand as we waded into the shallows, teaching me not to fear the water, but to respect it. It was the happiest day of my childhood, one I've carried with me through all the difficult years since her passing. This memory I offer freely. As I spoke the final words, a strange sensation passed through me, a brief lightheadedness, as if something had indeed been extracted from my mind. The air inside the truck cabin seemed to ripple, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. Outside, the stone pillar appeared to shimmer slightly before stabilizing again. I waited, unsure what to expect next. After several minutes, with no apparent change, I reluctantly started the engine again. The headlights seemed brighter now, illuminating a greater distance ahead. The road before me looked different, wider, with proper pavement and faded but visible center lines. With no better options, I put the truck in gear and continued forward. After about 20 minutes of driving, I began to notice familiar landmarks. A distinctive cluster of acacia trees I remembered, a small bridge over a dry riverbed. Relief flooded through me as I realized I was indeed back on the regular highway between Zambia and Tanzania. My GPS flickered back to life, confirming my location. Soon after, my satellite phone regained signal, and I was able to contact my dispatcher to explain the delay, though I gave a simplified explanation involving a wrong turn and mechanical troubles. When I finally reached Dar es Salaam 2 days later and delivered my cargo, I tried to precisely recall the memory I had offered on that strange road. I could remember the basic facts, that my mother had taken me to the ocean as a child, but the emotional content was gone. The joy, the specific sensations, the sound of my mother's voice as she encouraged me into the waves, all had faded to simple data points rather than a lived experience. It was as if I'd read about someone else's memory rather than lost my own. In the weeks since, I've researched wandering roads and similar phenomena across African folklore. I've found references in several cultures to paths that shift location, roads that appear only under certain conditions, and highways that demand payment for safe passage. Most interestingly, I discovered an academic paper about a village called Mbosi that allegedly disappeared entirely in 1954, with all 157 residents vanishing overnight. The location described would place it very close to where I experienced my strange detour. I've continued driving my routes across Africa. I have little choice, as this is my livelihood, but I no longer drive at night on remote stretches of highway, and I've installed additional GPS tracking systems in my truck, including one that records my exact route for later analysis. So far, I haven't encountered the wandering road again, but I remain vigilant for signs, unexpected GPS glitches, unusually perfect pavement, the absence of normal nighttime sounds. Most concerning, perhaps, is what happened 3 nights ago. I was parked at a recognized truck stop in Kenya, hundreds of kilometers from where my strange experience occurred. Around 3 a.m., I was awakened by the sound of an engine idling directly outside my truck. Looking out, I saw a cargo truck identical to the driverless one I had passed on the wandering road. As I watched, frozen in my berth, the truck's passenger door opened slowly. Though no one was visible inside, it remained open for perhaps 30 seconds, as if waiting, before closing again. The truck then pulled away, continuing down the highway into the darkness. I'm writing this account between deliveries, parked at a busy depot in Mombasa. The sun is shining, people are working all around me, and the supernatural seems impossible in this mundane setting. Yet I know what I experienced, and I know what I lost. My mother's face is becoming harder to recall clearly. Specific memories of her are fading faster than they should. Sometimes I wonder what else I've given up without realizing it. And sometimes, checking my rearview mirrors as the sun sets, I can't help but watch for unusual headlights gaining on me from behind. A truck without a driver, coming to offer me another chance to continue down the wandering road. I check my route maps obsessively now before each journey, but a thought haunts me. If a road can change its nature, can a destination do the same? How can I be certain that the cities I deliver to are the same ones I've known before? Just yesterday, approaching Nairobi, The skyline seemed subtly wrong for several moments before resolving into its familiar profile. Was it a trick of the light or something more? And the old man's words returned to me often. The road has appetites. What if those appetites grow stronger? What if next time a simple memory isn't payment enough? Tonight I must drive again, delivering medical supplies to a remote clinic near the Tanzanian border. The most direct route would take me along the same highway where I encountered the wandering road. I've plotted an alternate path, adding nearly 6 hours to my journey, but staying on busier roads. Even so, I find myself checking the quality of the asphalt beneath my wheels, watching for any signs of unusual smoothness or perfect markings. Every set of headlights approaching makes me tense until I can confirm there's a driver behind the wheel. The strangest part is that sometimes, especially as I'm falling asleep, I find myself almost missing the wandering road, feeling a pull toward that impossible highway with its perfect surface and heavy silence, as if having given it a piece of myself, I now belong to it in some way, as if, eventually, I will have no choice but to return and offer another memory, and another, until